On the day I buried my husband, not a single family member showed up. Not my parents, not my sister, not even my best friend. I'm Emma, and in that silent, empty church, I realized the people I loved most had already buried me in their hearts. Have you ever been abandoned by the ones you thought would always stand by you? Tell me in the comments, because silence can speak louder than grief. I had pictured this day so many times, though never quite like this. The stained glass windows, usually vibrant with stories of saints and sacrifice, looked dull against the steel gray sky. Wind hissed through the old wooden frames, rattling the panes as though trying to escape the stillness inside. And still, it was the silence that cut deepest. David always said funerals weren't for the dead, they were for the living. But what if the living didn't show up? I sat in the front pew, gripping the folded funeral program so tightly that the edges sliced into my palm. David Monroe, 1983 to 2019. It read in gold letters that caught the flicker of the altar candles. I could feel the heat from the nearest flame, weak, like the furnace barely keeping the old church above freezing. Rows upon rows of empty pews stretched behind me. 2 coworkers from the clinic where David volunteered nodded politely from the back row, their winter coats still buttoned. A neighbor brought a casserole dish, still warm, bless her, but slipped out before the service began. The rest were strangers, quiet, respectful, but strangers nonetheless. Not a single face from my side, not my parents, not my sister, not even Sarah. Sarah, who once helped me pick out my wedding dress. Sarah, who said she'd be my person no matter what life threw at us. Her absence felt like a missing tooth, subtle at first, but your tongue finds the gap every few seconds. The pastor's voice echoed too clearly as he read Psalm 23. His words hovered in the cold air, barely landing. I had never imagined burying David would be this hollow. He would have hated this. He hated when people pretended. The fake politeness, the empty rituals. He once told me if he died before me, he wanted music, whiskey, and someone telling the truth. But now he was here, laid out beneath a cascade of white lilies curling at the edges. Their scent, once comforting, had turned bitter and overripe, like celebration flowers left too long in a room no one visits. My phone buzzed again. I didn't look. It had been buzzing since 9 a.m. Missed calls, texts, all from the people who weren't here. We need to talk. Call me now. It's not what you think. Can you meet later? Each message like a drip of melted wax down my spine. I didn't respond. I wouldn't. Not today. When the service ended, I stood alone as the casket was wheeled down the aisle. The church doors groaned open. Outside, a gust of icy air greeted us like a slap. I followed behind, arms wrapped around myself, breath clouding. The ground at the cemetery was stiff, the grass thin and yellowed. Someone had tried to rake the leaves, but they'd just blown back again. David's casket was lowered slowly. I stepped closer than the funeral director wanted and stared down as the earth opened to receive him. The first shovel of dirt hit the wood like a punch, a dull, final sound. I flinched, and still, no one. No hand on my shoulder, no whispered, "You're not alone." No sister slipping me a tissue, no mother stroking my hair. Just me, the wind, and the sound of earth swallowing everything we'd built together. I bent forward slightly. Whispered words meant only for him. "They chose champagne over compassion," I said, voice cracking. "Let them learn what silence tastes like." It didn't matter if they ever understood. I would not forget. Later, sitting in the car outside the funeral home, I watched the last bit of light drain from the horizon. My fingers, still trembling, fumbled for the ignition. The cold had seeped through my coat, into my bones, into the parts of me that used to feel warm around the holidays. My phone screen lit up again. "Sarah. Sorry I couldn't miss it. You understand, right?" I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen. My breath fogged the window, hiding the cemetery behind me. I didn't reply. I let the silence stretch, because for the first time, I wasn't sure I did understand. The doorbell rang again. Not a chime, not a gentle press, but a firm, repeated buzz, like someone meant to wake the dead or break through whatever remained of the silence I'd been clinging to since the funeral. I sat motionless on the sofa, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea I hadn't touched in hours. Outside, the wind scraped dead leaves across the porch. Inside, the scent of lilies lingered in the corners of the room, clinging to the carpet and curtains like a memory that refused to fade. The casserole dishes from neighbors, kind but distant, had overtaken the fridge, stacked in mismatched Tupperware like polite apologies no one really meant. The doorbell rang again. I stood slowly, my joints stiff from sitting too long. My mind whispered the names of who it might be. Sarah, finally showing up with a bottle of wine and 1,000 excuses. Maybe even the pastor checking in. But when I opened the door, I saw silk, pearls, and perfume. "Hi, sweetheart." My mother smiled like we were meeting for brunch. Her eyes, still lined in gold shimmer, scanned the entryway as if calculating square footage. She stepped inside without waiting, leaving a trail of high-end fragrance in her wake, something crisp and floral, expensive, like spring at a designer mall. Her heels clicked on the hardwood. "You didn't answer my messages," she said, glancing briefly at the framed photo of David on the hallway table. It was draped in a black ribbon. I was worried. I didn't answer. I just closed the door behind her. She walked into the living room like she owned the air in it. Her coat, a cream wool blend I once admired in a magazine, slid off her shoulders as if it had rehearsed the moment. She laid it gently across the arm of the couch and sat down, legs crossed, one polished fingernail brushing invisible lint from her skirt. "It's so quiet in here," she said. "Death does that to a house, doesn't it?" I said nothing. "Well," she went on, folding her hands neatly in her lap, "I know you've had a rough few days. We all have. But life moves forward. You're strong. You'll manage." I sat across from her, fingers curled into the sleeve of my sweater. She looked at the half-melted candles on the mantel, their wax dried in odd shapes. "I lit those when your father had surgery," she said, tone nostalgic. "Back in '04, remember? It helped." I remembered. I remembered sitting in that hospital cafeteria for 5 hours while she left to get her hair done. "Anyway," she continued, brushing past her own thought, "I didn't come to dwell on sadness. You've had the service, the closure. Now we need to think about next steps." The words hit like frost on bare skin. She leaned forward. "Your sister's been through a lot too, Emma. She's carrying most of the burden now with her kids, her bills, the divorce. And David's passing, well, it changes things for everyone." My grip tightened. Somewhere behind her, the clock ticked a little louder. She smiled, the kind of smile that meant she was about to say something she'd already practiced in the mirror. "You know David's accounts were in your joint name. I understand that. But Rebecca, well, she needs a hand. A redistribution would make things fairer for everyone. Family is about balance, after all." I stared at her, not blinking. She took my silence as a good sign. "I brought a few documents, just draft ideas, nothing final. We're not pushing, just thinking out loud. I know David would have wanted us to work together." The sound of his name in her mouth made something twist inside me. I watched her pull a folded manila envelope from her purse and place it on the coffee table like an offering. "You were always the calm one," she said, voice soft. "So level-headed. Rebecca, she reacts. You reflect, that's why this can work." She reached for her teacup, the one I hadn't offered her, and took a sip of nothing. Old habits. "And Emma," she added, lifting her chin, "try not to be selfish. Your sister deserves support. She's family." There it was. The word that had started wars and silenced women for generations. Family. Used like a leash. A debt. A sentence. I looked at her polished nails, her carefully managed expressions, the pearls glinting beneath the dim light. And still, I said nothing. In my silence, she saw compliance. In her mind, I was already folding. She leaned back, satisfied, tapping the envelope with one elegant finger. And then I spoke. "Come in, Mom," I whispered. "Let's settle this." Her smile faltered for just a second. I stood, walked to the mantel, and picked up David's framed photo, tracing the glass with my thumb. Behind me, my mother adjusted her scarf, unaware that the temperature in the room had shifted. We weren't here to talk about balance. We weren't here for healing. We were here because she mistook my grief for weakness and my silence for surrender. She would learn soon enough the difference. They thought silence was weakness. I was about to prove it could be a blade. It was mid-January, and the snow outside had crusted into brittle sheets, like the world itself had gone rigid. Inside my kitchen, the light flickered, casting long shadows over untouched casseroles stacked in Pyrex dishes, chicken pot pie, lasagna, baked mac and cheese, love disguised in carbohydrates, now hardened and cold. I hadn't thrown them away. I just couldn't. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't just David's absence. It was the void between me and every voice that used to matter. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. Probably my mother, or Sarah, or Rebecca. The chorus of women who once filled my life with laughter now crowded my notifications with apologies and polished excuses. I ignored them. Instead, I went to the hallway closet. David had kept everything in that old tin lockbox: bills, car titles, weird notes to himself, even expired coupons. He used to joke that if we ever vanished, the FBI could piece our lives together from that one metal box. It was heavier than I remembered. I brought it to the kitchen table, cleared a space between the cold dishes, and opened it with the small bronze key he had taped under the coffee maker. And there it was. Folded neatly inside a yellowing envelope was David's will. I unfolded it slowly, my fingers trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of this new reality. His handwriting danced in familiar loops. To my wife, Emma Monroe, I leave everything I have and everything I am. There were no contingencies, no mentions of Rebecca, no hidden trusts, no backdoor arrangements with my mother. Everything, our house, his savings, his investments, even the 1968 Mustang he had spent 5 years restoring, was mine. Just mine. A sharp knock at the door startled me, but when I peered through the window, it was just a delivery. Another sympathy card, probably. Another reminder of people too late to matter. I picked up my phone and finally listened to the most recent voicemail. Sarah's voice, shaky but rehearsed. "Hey, I wanted to be there, I really did, but it was Rebecca's birthday and she needed me. I thought you'd understand, you always do. Please don't shut me out. Let's talk soon, okay?" Talk? About what? That she chose my sister's birthday bash over my husband's funeral? That champagne was more urgent than grief? I closed the voicemail and scrolled to another message from her. "Emma, I was caught between loyalty and obligation. I chose wrong. Please." Her words rang hollow, like she was trying to repaint a cracked wall, hoping I wouldn't notice the damage beneath. Later that day, I drove to Mr. Daniel's office, our family's lawyer, for as long as I could remember. He was old school, mahogany shelves lined with outdated encyclopedias, a grandfather clock that ticked louder than any conversation, and a desk cluttered with manila folders and a Dunkin' cup half filled with cold coffee. He greeted me with a warm nod and no small talk, just the way David liked it. "I found David's will," I said, handing it over. Mr. Daniels read through the pages with the kind of concentration usually reserved for bombs or land deeds. "Well," he said finally, adjusting his glasses, "it's clear, unambiguous. All assets are yours. No legal challenge is possible unless someone tries something unorthodox." I arched a brow. "Like what?" He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Preparedness is power, Emma. You don't have to do anything now. But if someone comes knocking with demands, you have every legal right to say no." That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table again. I turned off my phone, this time not out of avoidance, but choice. Let them call. Let them text. Let them scramble. They thought I was still cornered by grief, that I'd fold under the weight of their pressure, of their entitlement, of their shallow reasoning. But the truth was simple. I wasn't cornered. I was waiting. The doorbell rang once more, then stopped. I didn't answer it. I didn't move. They had no idea I was already in control, not with words or confrontation, but with something sharper. Silence. The kind that forces people to hear their own echoes. The kind that reveals their intentions with every breath they take to fill the gap I refuse to close. I picked up David's will again, read his words slowly. They weren't just legal, they were sacred. A vow from him that even in death, he trusted me to stand alone if I had to. I pressed the paper to my chest, then folded it again and placed it in a fireproof box, just in case. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply. The kitchen still smelled of cold food and fading flowers, but there was something else now. Resolve. It had no scent, no sound, but I could feel it in my spine, in the steadiness of my hands. As I reached for my phone to turn it completely off, the screen lit up again. "Sarah, can we meet? You need to hear my side." I stared at the message, then closed the phone without replying. I wasn't interested in sides anymore. I had chosen mine. I placed the phone face down on the counter, whispering only to myself. They think I'm cornered, but the cage is already theirs. They didn't knock like family. They pounded like debt collectors, relentless, rhythmically violent. Each thud against my front door sent a shiver through the window pane beside it. I stood in the hallway, mug of now cold tea in hand, staring at the door like it might collapse inward under the weight of their entitlement. The house was dim with late winter light. The sun never quite committed that February. Dust swirled lazily through the blinds. I'd just finished stacking a pile of old mail when the first knock hit. Now the pounding was louder, insistent. I didn't answer right away. The doorbell rang twice. Then, muffled voices. "Emma, we know you're in there," came Linda's voice. Tight, practiced, tinged with what she must have believed passed for concern. I opened the door, not wide, just enough. Linda pushed past before I could speak, her heels clicking on the wood floors like a judge entering court. She wore her pearls again, same silk coat from the funeral. Her perfume filled the room before her presence even registered. Then came Charles, larger than life and louder than necessary, as always. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, brushing past me like I was the help, not the homeowner. Rebecca followed, phone in hand, scrolling through something she barely looked away from. "You changed the locks," she said without looking up. "I did," I answered flatly, then turned my attention to the last figure on the porch, Sarah. She lingered there, half in, half out, like a child unsure if she was welcome. She offered a faint smile. I didn't return it. They seated themselves uninvited. Linda crossed her legs like she was about to chair a meeting. Charles leaned back, already frowning. Rebecca tossed her bag onto the couch and sighed as if this visit had already gone on too long. "I would have appreciated a call," I said. Linda gave a humorless chuckle. "Darling, you haven't exactly been reachable." "Silence speaks volumes," I replied, walking past them, setting my mug down with a soft clink. Charles jumped in, already annoyed. "Enough with the drama. We came to talk sense into you." Rebecca nodded, brushing a blonde curl from her face. "You don't need to live like this, Emma. Alone in this big house? You don't even have a dog. I mean, come on." I sat on the armrest of David's favorite chair. "You're right, I don't have a dog. But I have peace, which is more than I can say about the rest of you." Rebecca scoffed. Linda leaned forward, hands clasped. "Honey, listen. We're just trying to help. Your sister's struggling, you know that. She and Nathan are barely keeping up. And David's accounts, well, he wouldn't have wanted you to hoard things out of spite." There it was. I nodded slowly. "So this is about what he left behind?" Charles snapped. "Don't twist our words. It's about fairness." "Fairness," I echoed. "Like the fairness of none of you showing up at his funeral?" That silenced the room for one delicious second. Rebecca glanced at Sarah, who was still standing awkwardly by the door, silent. She hadn't said a word. Linda waved dismissively. "Emma, funerals are hard. And that week was hectic. You know your sister had her investor pitch, and Sarah had family things. It doesn't mean we don't care." I turned to Sarah. "Was the champagne at Rebecca's party good?" She flinched. I didn't press further. Instead, I stood up slowly and crossed to the mantel. I picked up the framed photo of David, his navy uniform crisp, his eyes kind, laughing just behind the camera. I held it to my chest, like armor. "You abandoned him in death," I said, voice steady, "and you abandoned me in grief. Now you'll feel what abandonment truly is." No one moved. At that precise moment, as if summoned by fate or fury, the doorbell rang again. One polite chime. I walked over and opened it. Mr. Daniels stepped inside, calm as always, brown coat buttoned to the top, holding a leather folder. He gave me a small nod before turning to the room. "Linda, Charles, Rebecca." His voice held the warmth of someone who never raised it. "I trust you're well." Rebecca stood. "Who is this?" "Our attorney," I answered. Daniels handed me a thick envelope, then another. As per David Monroe's will, witnessed and notarized last May, these contain certified copies. One for you, one for your records. Linda looked confused. "Excuse me, why are we just now hearing about this?" "Because," I said softly, "no one asked." I held the envelope out to Linda. Her fingers snatched it from mine, trembling with a cocktail of anger and anticipation. She ripped it open with the carelessness of someone unaccustomed to being denied. Rebecca stepped closer to read over her shoulder, and as Linda's eyes scanned the page, her lips slowly parted, then pressed together in a thin, pale line. Rebecca's voice less smug now. "What does it say?" I turned to Sarah. "Still sure you understand why you missed the funeral?" She looked away. I stepped back, watching the sunlight crawl across the carpet, catching on the edges of the will. "Read it," I said, out loud. Linda didn't move. Silence fell again. But this time, it belonged to me. In a small town, you don't need newspapers. All you need is one chatty waitress with a good memory and a long shift. By the second week of March, My family had become the main course on every breakfast table and the last bite of every late-night pie. It started with whispers at the diner. I overheard them while waiting for a to-go order, my coat zipped up high, baseball cap pulled low. Two women, regulars I vaguely recognized from church back in the day, leaned in over black coffee and murmured, "Can you believe it? Skipped their son-in-law's funeral. Now they're begging banks to unlock frozen funds." Their spoons stirred in unison like a ritual. "Shame," the other one said. "Shame doesn't melt in spring." I didn't flinch. I just waited for my order, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and slipped out unnoticed. That had become my gift lately, to vanish while still standing in the room. Rebecca's rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the weekend after. She'd chosen a boutique vineyard outside town, white barn, fairy lights, overpriced finger foods that were more presentation than nutrition. Except this time, the fairy lights didn't twinkle. Half of them were unplugged. The florist sent an email that morning saying they regretfully had to cancel due to unresolved payment concerns. The caterer pulled out last minute, too, citing a contract discrepancy. The result was a room that looked like a Pinterest dream, half loaded. I didn't attend. I didn't have to. The photos filtered onto social media anyway. Sparse tables, half-filled wine glasses, a band that never showed. One picture stood out. Rebecca, in a white cocktail dress, standing beside a cake that looked suspiciously store-bought. Her smile was taut, like elastic about to snap. No caption, just a sea of emojis, some hard-eyed, some question marks. I received Linda's call that night, not to apologize, not to ask how I was doing, but to request something, as always. "Emma," she said, voice hushed but tight, "this is getting out of control. People are looking at us differently." I let the silence hum between us. She tried again. "Your sister is devastated. The vendors think we're—" A sharp exhale. "Dishonest. Charles can't even show his face at Rotary anymore." There it was, the wound they couldn't dress, their pride, and the town had turned it into an open sore. "You know what would fix this?" Linda continued as if pitching a business proposal. "If you just release the funds, quietly, we'd make it right. No one has to know." I almost laughed, but I didn't. I let her words hang, like an unfinished sentence, and hung up without replying. Later that night, Sarah tried again. Another voicemail, layered over the 5 I hadn't opened. Her voice had lost its brightness. It trembled now, like a candle in wind. "I know you're hurt. I get it. I messed up. I was trying to be there for everyone, and I ended up being there for no one. But Emma, can we talk? Please don't shut me out. We can fix this." But I wasn't broken. I sat at the kitchen table, still covered in the same vinyl cloth David had spilled spaghetti on 2 years ago. The stain was faint now, barely visible, like so much of what had been real between us. His photo sat on the mantel. I had changed the frame. It was wood now, not silver. Silver felt cold, impersonal. Wood carried warmth, even in grief. A casserole dish from the funeral still occupied space in the fridge. I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. Not because I wanted to eat it, but because someone had cared enough to leave it. That kind of gesture felt rare these days. The phone buzzed again, another message from Linda. This time, she didn't sound angry. She sounded tired. "Please, we need your help." Need, not want, not deserve, need. I turned the phone over in my hand, the screen facing the table. Then I whispered, not to them, not to David, but to the stillness around me. "I needed you once too." And in that silence, I found something firmer than forgiveness. I found resolve. They had made their choice, long before the will or the wedding or the whispers. They had chosen champagne over compassion, a toast over a eulogy, and now the town they once ruled with smiles and small favors saw them for who they were, guests who left early, family who stayed absent. Let them stew in that. Let them explain. I would not. On the day my sister walked down the aisle in a borrowed lace gown, I walked among gravestones in my worn brown boots. The cemetery sat at the edge of town, quiet and windswept, bordered by a low stone wall that hadn't been repaired since before David and I moved here. The grass had started turning green again, reluctant shoots pushing through winter's grip. Sunlight filtered through bare branches above, flickering across the names of strangers and loved ones alike. I found David's grave easily. It was always the one with fresh lilies. I had picked them up that morning from Mrs. Jenkins's flower stall near the farmer's market. She didn't ask where I was headed. She just handed me the bouquet wrapped in brown paper and said, Looks like Spring finally got the memo." I nodded, grateful she hadn't asked about Rebecca's wedding. Everyone else had. The town wasn't as cruel as it was curious. "Did you hear?" People whispered over donuts and deviled eggs. The Carters paid for the whole thing themselves. No trust fund, no inheritance, even used fake roses at the altar. It wasn't mockery. It was quiet astonishment. A family that once walked on social clouds was now trudging through muddy reputations. Vendors demanded deposits. Old friends RSVP'd, maybe, and never showed. Someone said the pastor skipped the rehearsal dinner without explanation. Another said the photographer left after the cake cutting because of a bounced check. I hadn't planned to listen to gossip, but it found its way to me like wind finds cracks in old windows. I sat beside David's grave, not on a chair or blanket, just cross-legged on the slightly damp earth. The lilies I laid down leaned slightly with the breeze, their white petals bright against the granite. His name was carved clean and strong, just like he had been. Underneath, I had chosen the inscription myself. He loved quietly, and that was enough. I exhaled slowly, watching my breath disappear in the warming air. "You missed quite a show," I murmured, brushing a speck of dirt off the corner of his headstone. "The whole town knows now, about the will, about the silence, about how quickly people can vanish when grief gets inconvenient." I let my fingers trail the edge of the stone. They abandoned us, but I buried them too, not in earth, but in the silence of their own choices. It didn't sound like victory. It didn't need to. In the weeks after the reading of the will, there had been no grand confrontations, no apologies, just messages that slowed, then stopped. My parents disappeared into their own embarrassment. Rebecca posted filtered wedding photos with vague captions like, "Cherish what you have," and "Some things aren't for everyone to understand." Sarah sent one final text, "Take care of yourself, okay?" I never replied. Sometimes people believe silence is absence, but I'd learned it could also be presence, the kind that fills a room, or in this case, a graveyard. It held space for everything I couldn't say during the chaos: grief, strength, anger, and strangely peace. The wind stirred through the trees. For a second, just a sliver of a moment, it sounded like his voice. Not words, just the familiar tone of it, the way he used to hum under his breath while folding laundry, or say my name softly when I was upset. I closed my eyes. "I still miss you," I whispered, "but I think you'd be proud." I didn't shout, I didn't fight, I let them do it all to themselves. A long silence followed, the kind that doesn't ache, the kind that feels earned. I stood slowly, knees stiff, and looked once more at the stone. "You taught me that dignity isn't loud," I said, "and neither is love, but both leave echoes." As I turned to leave, the breeze lifted again, tugging gently at my coat. A bird chirped nearby, its song sharp, simple, unbothered. Life went on, even in cemeteries, especially in cemeteries. Rebecca would be saying her vows around now. I imagined the venue, the soft chatter of guests, the clink of borrowed champagne flutes, the forced smiles. I didn't wish her misery. I didn't wish her anything at all. Because sometimes peace isn't found in what we gain. It's found in what we let go of. I paused at the cemetery gate, one hand resting on the rusted metal. Behind me, the lilies swayed gently, unbothered by vows or veils. Ahead of me, the road was quiet. And I walked. On the day my sister said, "I do," I stood by a headstone and whispered, "I remember." There was no music, no applause, just the soft rustle of spring leaves and the quiet comfort of knowing I'd chosen presence over performance. Sometimes family isn't defined by blood or big gestures, but by who shows up when it matters most. In grief, I learned that silence can hold strength, and letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. If this story reminds you of someone you miss, or someone you stood by when no one else did, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because in the end, love doesn't always speak loudly, but it always echoes.